Good evening to you all. This meeting was a bit longer than expected. I have with me, as usual, President Mario here in Lisbon. We have Commissioner Paolo Gentiloni in Brussels, and the SM Managing Director Klaus in Luxembourg. Journalists will be able to place questions to the three gentlemen using the Zoom system, as with previous Eurogroups. And without further ado, I'll pass the floor to the President.
Thank you, Luis. Good evening from Lisbon. The last Eurogroup was just 1 week ago. We have been busy making good on our promise to add a new line of defense of up to 540 billion euros. I can report good progress today. The groundbreaking political decisions taken in the Eurogroup a month ago are being translated into legal reality in record time. Let me take a moment to summarize where we stand with our three safety nets. As of today, pandemic crisis support is operational. This afternoon, the ESM Board of Governors formally confirmed the eligibility of all euro area member states and made the instrument available with immediate effect. Member states are doing whatever is needed to get this pandemic under control. The ESM is ready to support them in that. The exceptional costs incurred with direct and indirect health care, cure and prevention expenses can be covered by the mechanism. So the first safety net for sovereigns is now in place. The second safety net is for workers, the SURE program. The Council has reached a political agreement on all aspects this morning. The SURE program will become law in a few days after formal procedures are completed. Member States are doing whatever is needed to protect workers, their jobs, and their incomes during this pandemic. The SURE program means that these efforts are backed up by European solidarity in the form of cheap loans. The third and final safety net is for businesses, the EIB's so-called Pan-European Guarantee. President Hoyer debriefed us on the progress made to define the main parameters of this scheme. Policy formulation always entails some political choices and trade-offs. The discussion today helped to clarify where we now stand, especially on issues of scope and risk management. I believe today we prepared the ground for an agreement by the EIB. I will remain closely involved in this file in the next few days. Once this is operationalized, countries can start contributing to the guarantee fund that constitutes the firepower of this instrument. Member States have been taking unprecedented steps to keep firms afloat during this crisis, but our firms are not simply national concerns. They operate in our single European market, and it is essential to have this common safety net to keep viable firms in business and prevent fragmentation of the single market. These three safety nets are a vital contribution to preserve the fabric of our societies as we go through this crisis. But they are emergency measures. As we come out of the woods, we will need something more to speed the economic recovery and to ensure we grow together and not apart. This was underlined by the European Council last month, and today the Eurogroup discussed strategic priorities for the recovery together with non-euro area ministers. The Eurogroup had already agreed on some key features of the recovery fund. It must be temporary, targeted, and commensurate with the extraordinary costs of this crisis. It must help spread costs over time and ensure solidarity with most affected member states. Today, we complemented these agreed lines with a strategic discussion on the features, design, size, and priorities for the recovery. I know the issue of financing attracts much interest, but the spending is no less important. I sense a broad consensus for using the recovery as an opportunity to accelerate the modernization of our economies, in particular the transition to a green and digital economy. policies to restart the single market and preserve the integrity of supply chains, which demonstrate the interdependence of our economies, are also a priority. As we pool further resources, it makes sense to channel our response through instruments that address agreed spending priorities and to resume the reform process, while preserving the ownership of these policies at the national dimension. In defining the common priorities, we should not lose sight of the specificity of the euro area. The Eurogroup can play a role in supporting an alignment and complementarity among these priorities. We will continue to closely monitor the economic situation and to prepare the ground for a robust recovery, as the European Council mandated us to do. As you can see, this was an exploratory discussion, but it provided guidance of where a political balance can be found in these issues. The Commission's proposal for a recovery fund, to be expected by the end of the month, will define this debate, and we will be able to return to this with a more focused discussion. Before I go, let me recall that today we were privileged to have with us Irene Tingali, the chair of the European Parliament's Econ Committee. Irene was with us for our regular exchange of views on the euro area's economic outlook and challenges. This time, of course, our focus was on the impact of the COVID-19 crisis. We took note of the European Parliament concerns and ideas and praised it in the person of Irene for the hard work through the period of the crisis, which was epitomized in the resolution it recently adopted. I am glad that we have been able to keep these exchanges going with the European Parliament, even in the current exceptional circumstances. At the same time, I look forward to meet again soon in Brussels.
Well, thank you, and good evening. I think that today the Union showed that we are able to deliver solutions and to implement decisions that we took a few weeks ago. So first of all, we decided on health and finalizing this ESM pandemic crisis support, which is now available, ready for use. It is, as you know, favorable financing worth 2% of each euro area member state's GDP. The only condition, I repeat, the only condition for using this credit line is that the money has to be used for direct and indirect healthcare costs. All documentation related to this support is publicly available, as it was just said. Nothing is hidden. And now it is for each government to decide, obviously, whether they wish to apply for this support. Second, we have delivered for workers. The ambassadors in Coreper reached the agreement earlier today, and this mechanism sure will become law when formally adopted by written procedure on Tuesday. Sure unlocks 100 billion euros to help workers keep their jobs. I was impressed yesterday seeing that another 3 million American workers had lost their jobs, bringing the total to 36 million since the start of the crisis. European labor markets are far from perfect, but they do have their strengths. Schemes like the Cassa Integrazione, Kurzarbeit, or Chômage Partiel, or other similar schemes in member states are certainly among them. So it's great news that they can now count on this support from the European Union. for sure to be fully operational, we need now member states to sign the guarantees that will enable the Commission to raise the necessary funds on the market. And we count on all actors to ensure that these final steps can be completed as swiftly as possible. Further progress, as Mario said, is necessary on the EIB European Guarantee Fund, and the Commission strongly supports the effort for this last mile on this third instrument. Today, as you know, Eurostat issued its flash estimate for GDP growth in the first quarter of the year, which, by the way, was remarkably close to our spring forecast. For the European Union, the flash estimate minus 3.3% growth, and for the euro area, minus 3.8% of growth. Of course, the hit to growth in the second quarter is clearly going to be a lot worse. So all incoming data confirms that the shock we are experiencing is indeed without precedent. And that's why our response also needs to be of a magnitude that is without precedent. To support more affected sectors and geographical areas, to avoid to fragilize the level playing field in the single market, and to have excessive divergence among member states. As you know, the Commission is working hard to prepare a proposal for this recovery fund and lead to the next multi-annual financial framework. It is a complex exercise, but we will be ready to present our proposal in the last week of May. And the debate that we had today in the Eurogroup is, I think, very helpful for the Commission in the finalizing of this exercise. As the President von der Leyen said yesterday in the European Parliament, and the Recovery Fund will be built on three pillars. First, supporting member states to recover from the crisis with a recovery and resilience tool which will account for the bulk of the funding, to support investment and reforms created to fund key public investment and reforms aligned with our European priorities, notably the green and digital transition. Second, helping to mobilize private investment, which we expect to drop by around 800 billion in 2020-2021 compared to what was forecast before the crisis. And this is essential to support strategic sectors and technologies. And third, finally, learning the most immediate lessons of the crisis, we will strengthen programs as RescEU, as well as creating a new dedicated program. I know that you are all impatient to know how much money will be put on the table, the balance between loans and grants, and so on. These issues were discussed in the Eurogroup. What I can tell you now is that there is plenty of determination in the Commission to present a proposal that is as ambitious as the situation demands. And of course, we are aware that ambition is also expected by the European Parliament, which has adopted today a very clear resolution in that sense, as we heard from Irene Tinagli, that Mario invited in our exchange with her this afternoon. So we must continue to deliver the solution that our citizens need to ensure that no part of Europe is left alone and that the crisis do not undermine the single market and worsen divergence in the euro area. Thank you.
Yes, good evening to all of you. Today, as you heard, we took the final step to make the ESM's pandemic crisis support fully operational. That decision was taken by our Board of Governors, the highest decision-making body of the ESM. So now this credit line is available for all euro area member countries, finance urgent direct and indirect healthcare related needs. And members can finance a part of those needs in a safe way at very low interest rates, currently around 0. Each member state will benefit from the support in a volume of 2% of its GDP. I think this can be attractive, since the only condition attached to this support is the requirement to spend the money on direct and indirect health sector costs linked to the pandemic, as also Commissioner Gentiloni just mentioned. And if member states use ESM money to finance these costs, they can use their own money to finance other parts of the growing fiscal deficit. It is also important in this context that the European Commission's assessment confirmed that all 19 euro area and ESM member states are eligible for support. So all countries can apply. If an ESM member applies for the credit line, funds do not have to be drawn. It's a precautionary credit line. So it's designed to be like a protection or an insurance. But of course, once a country applies, the credit line and the possibility to draw from it is there for the time of the entire availability period, and that without the decision by ESM bodies. If loans are drawn, they will have a maximum average maturity of 10 years. The ESM members that benefit from the pandemic crisis support will be subject to monitoring by the European Commission, but the Commission has made it very clear that this monitoring has been adapted to the circumstances and focus only on the actual use of the funds to cover direct and indirect healthcare costs. Also, there will be no ad hoc missions in addition to the standard ones. Likewise, the ESM will carry out this early warning system to assess countries' ability to repay the loan, but make it clear this has nothing to do with conditionality. Let me also say that we had this exchange of views with the President of the Econ Committee of the European Parliament. As you heard, the ESM as an international organization, legally we are not an EU institution, so therefore we are not accountable to the European Parliament. Nevertheless, we collaborate closely with the European Parliament and formally, particularly with the Econ Committee. I have followed their invitation frequently in recent years. The last time was in March, only about a month and a half ago, to inform the members of the European Parliament about the work of the ESM. And I believe it is important that members of the European Parliament are well informed also about our work. The final work on the general discussion we had of Europe's response to the corona crisis. Just a few words from the ESM perspective. I think it's important that the European institutions are able to provide financing quickly during this first phase, this emergency phase of the crisis. And we are still in this emergency phase. That's why the Eurogroup and the summit agreed on this 540 billion euro package from the Commission via the SURE program, the EIB and the ESM. And this money will help particularly those countries that are most affected by the crisis. The implementation will be done deliberately that way to compensate for the asymmetric response that we see at the national level. And this is important, as also Commissioner Gentiloni said, to protect the single market, to maintain a level playing field, and to avoid excessive divergences within the euro area. Many ministers made the point today in the Eurogroup that we have one European economy. We don't have 19 economies in the euro area or 27 in the European Union. So in a way, this the fact that we will help the most affected countries more is in a way not solidarity, it's really in the self-interest of all member states. And I think a similar approach will be needed during the recovery phase, the second phase that will follow the emergency phase, and that may last much longer, 2 or 3 years probably. And the recovery fund that is under discussion and the EU budget will be at the center of that and will be essential also because it's hard to see how grants can really be made available except via the EU budget. Thank you.
David Carretta, Radio Radicale. 2 questions, if I may. The first one on the ESM credit line. Did any country express interest to have this credit line quickly? And the second question on the recovery fund or whatever. Yesterday, President von der Leyen mentioned the fact that the first pillar would fund public investment, but also reforms. Do you foresee any conditionality for the recovery fund in terms of reforms or other type of conditionalities? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question. I will address the first question and probably leave the second one to Commissioner Gentiloni. No, not so far. It's very good news that the credit line is now available. It is a backstop. It is an insurance mechanism for all of us. We must value it in terms of the comfort it gives to all sovereigns in Europe vis-à-vis the markets functioning, and we think it's very important to have it, and so far no country applied to it.
Well, yes, I would say that 2 things. One, that for sure we need reforms. We need structural reform. The fact that we are in an extraordinary, unprecedented situation and emergency is not canceling this. But the fact that these reforms are needed in the next years is not meaning that there is a conditionality. This is not at all the scope of what we will provide with our recovery tools and plans. So yes, we need structural reforms, but I wouldn't say that there is a linkage with this solidarity and common tool operation and conditionalities.
Merci beaucoup. C'est Griselda Pastorsi de la radio espagnole SER. J'ai des questions. J'aimerais savoir pour le programme sûr, quand est-ce que vous comptez que les garanties nationales seront prêtes pour le programme puisse être utilisé? C'est ma première question. Ma deuxième question, c'est la vice-présidente espagnole insiste à dire qu'elle a une vraie inquiétude à propos des aides d'État, étant donné que les 50% des aides qui ont été approuvées par la Commission, c'est pour des entreprises allemandes et que juste le 2%, c'est pour des entreprises espagnoles, à demande bien sûr de chacun des États. Est-ce que le fonds de solidarité, de récupération, je ne sais pas comment il doit s'appeler, pourra être utilisé pour rééquilibrer ça ou non? Est-ce qu'il y a eu un débat sur ces points aujourd'hui? Merci.
Griselda, je n'ai pas compris ta dernière question.
D'accord. Ma dernière question, c'est savoir si... Pardon. Si les fonds pourra être utilisé, les fonds de solidarité, pourra être utilisé pour rééquilibrer les programmes qui, dans le marché, peuvent provoquer les aides d'État, étant donné que l'Espagne est à 10% d'aides autorisées et l'Allemagne à 50% des aides autorisées. Est-ce que le débat aujourd'hui a visé sur ces problèmes et la façon de rééquilibrer ça? Comment est-ce que ça va se faire? Merci.
Okay, thank you for your questions. There is a common concern in your questions, which is how do we establish a level playing field across countries in Europe. We worked towards achieving that already with the three backstops that we agreed in the Eurogroup and that we are now implementing. Sure. The EIB funding and ESM, the credit line. All those are meant to achieve a level playing field of the capacities that different countries in Europe have to respond to the crisis. And so we expect having been achieved the political agreement on sure that in the coming weeks the program is fully operational after the guarantees can be set up in the 27 countries that are part of this mechanism. The same thing is true for state aid. It is now for the Commission, as it evaluates the different requests for state aid submitted by countries, to make sure that there is a leveling out of the competition across Europe. And I don't want to be long in the recovery fund, but of course part of the very important goal of the recovery fund is to make the recovery even across Europe. So I think this is an essential part of every instrument that has been developed so far, and the recovery fund will not be an exception.
Mario, if I may, two things. One, to sign the guarantees for sure. Some member states have procedures involving also their parliament. I think it is fair to say that we will have the instrument finally and completely available in the summer, to be probably in July. Second point, it has to be clear, but I think that it is clear to the journalist that was asking that this imbalance is not because of a different evaluation of the Commission. It is an imbalance in the requests. Some member states made a much bigger amount of requests of this state aid than others. A way to rebalance this is in the discussion on this recovery plan, and an instrument that we are discussing, a solvency support instrument that will try to give a pan-European support, especially targeted to a situation where member states are not in the condition, because they don't have the fiscal space to support strategic companies. We are working on this.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Klaus Rέgklingg from the ESM. I know from backseat that the pandemic crisis response instrument is quite attractive in paper, but could you please calculate for some countries that are reluctant to tap into these amounts, how much could they save? For instance, let's say how much Greece could save if Greece taps into the capacity of the ESM2. Thanks.
Yes, I can give a rough estimate on that, but I wouldn't share your view that countries are reluctant. All member states of the ESM, all 19 countries of the Euro area support this instrument, have created this instrument, and it's now available, also after all the work done by the Commission on the assessment, and it's only available as of today. So the fact that nobody has requested it during the last 2 hours, I think should not be misinterpreted. And it's available. It doesn't mean that it has to be used, but the fact that it's available is already the first positive element. Then if a country wants to use it, request it, as I explained in my introductory remarks, it doesn't mean that money will flow. A country can request such a credit line, and that's very much like what the IMF offers, precautionary credit line. The IMF made it available to several countries the last few years, but the money was never activated. So there are several stages. If, and that was probably your question, if indeed then the money flows to the country in the amount of 2% of GDP, which in the case of Greece, that was your question, would be 3.7 billion euro. So many ifs before that. Then one can calculate, one can try to calculate what the savings are from today's perspective, because it will depend on market developments. Where are interest rates? As of today, when I look at the secondary market yield for 10-year Greek bonds, and I look at our own funding costs, which are around zero, then over the length of the loan, Greece could save around 800 million euro. But that's only one advantage. The other one is that this is safe money, as I said, because we are different from other creditors. If there's another problem, we will not withdraw this money. The money will be there, like the other money we credited to Greece over the last decade.
Thank you. Next question, Rita Cesar from Público, Portugal.
Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. It's another question on the recovery fund. In your discussions today, you talked about possibly using the BIC as a vehicle for that. Thank you.
Well, we must understand the following. The recovery fund is for the European Union as a whole, whereas the BIC is an instrument which is an existing instrument target for the euro area. So we, of course, can think of the BIC as an instrument to direct funds for countries because of its main characteristics, which can be easily summarized. It's a flexible instrument. It is very simple to align the priorities set out at the euro area level with the investments and projects that are submitted within the BIC, and it is a common instrument. So meaning this that the monitoring, the surveillance, the definition of priorities are set by all countries to use the funds through BIC. So I will say that, of course, it will depend on how the Commission will set up the recovery fund, but the principles of BIC are very easily and attractive to apply in this situation.
Yeah, hi. So I got just two quick questions for the President, then another question for the Commissioner. In terms of the EIB, I know we're looking then for a deal on Tuesday. Can you just go through what the main issues are that are stopping us from getting a deal? I understand one of them is trying to figure out whether big companies should also get loans. And then I'm curious, from your discussion with Tenali, do you think that any MFF demands from the Parliament could pose a problem to getting a deal on the recovery fund? And then to Commissioner Gentiloni, you mentioned that Q2 looks bad. Do you have any idea of how bad it could be? Thanks.
Bjarke, can you please repeat the questions, because the audio wasn't great. I didn't understand.
Okay. I mean, is the audio any better now, or no?
Give it a try, please.
Okay, I'll give it a go. Okay, so the first two to President Senteno was in terms of the EIB, like what are the main problems that are standing in our way of getting a deal on Tuesday? One of them, as I understand it, is that big companies, should get loans, or shouldn't they get loans? Should it be targeted to SMEs? Then I'm curious to get your thoughts on whether you think the Parliament could pose any problems in getting the recovery fund up and going. I know that they can't have a say on the recovery fund, but in terms of MFF. Yeah, do you get that? Yeah, no, okay.
Okay.
And then to Commissioner Gentiloni, in case you didn't hear me from before, you mentioned that the second quarter was going to be bad. Could you give me a sense of just how bad you think it's going to be? Thanks.
Yes, thank you for the questions, and sorry for having you repeating them. There was a lot of progress because, as you understand, this instrument has lots of details on it, and it's really important to define those quite precisely. The two remaining issues are, one is the scope. In the agreement of the Eurogroup, we set the focus on SMEs, and we need now to determine how to quantify this focus. So we need to get into a conclusion on this dimension. And the second dimension is the trade-off between the EIB's risk appetite and potential losses. We need to also define a threshold in terms of expected losses for the instrument, and these are the two main issues that are open and remain open. In terms of the recovery fund, we of course think that given the importance of this instrument to the recovery period, we already know that the crisis is very hard, and the only way we have today to make it easier in the future, to ease it in the future, is to be successful in the exit strategy of the very strong confinement and lockdown measures, and to be to have this recovery fund available. So all institutions will certainly work to, as much as with the MFF, to have the recovery fund through as quick as possible.
Yes, I mentioned this flash estimate for the first quarter, which is 3.8 minus 3.8 for the first quarter. Our forecast for the second quarter is minus 12.2. This is our.
Thank you. So, final question to Angelos, please.
Good evening, Luis. I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes, we can see you.
Thank you very much. Two quick questions for both President Senteno and Commissioner Gentiloni on the recovery funds. The first is if there was any discussion on joint debt issuance today, And as far as it concerns the design, if there was any discussion on having it inside the EU framework, or maybe considering having it in an intergovernmental form. Thank you.
Well, we really didn't discuss that today. We have discussed more on the needs for the recovery plan, and so maybe I think it's better for the Commission to take this question.
Unfortunately, I got, I don't know if there are two questions. If there are two questions, I got only the second.
So the first one was on joint debt issuance, if this was considered.
No, not in the discussion today. The second, I think, was in the discussion today, there was a possibility of having the fund not in the framework of the MFF and the as an intergovernmental tool, and this was not discussed today, and it will not be the proposal of the Commission anyway.
Okay, thank you very much. That's all for today. Thank you, and see you in the next Eurogroup, which right now, the next date we have on the table is the 11th of June, but if there's any new Eurogroup, we will let you know. Bye-bye.